All right, good morning, everybody. So as I said weeks back, I was eventually going to get to telling the story of our firstborn son, of Jaden Creed, of the greatest suffering that I and my wife, if I can speak for her, have ever gone through. It was a time, as I mentioned in the title of my video, my greatest fear has come upon me. I've never asked my wife if that was one of her greatest fears. I don't think so, because she desired to have children so much, but I didn't. So my greatest fears came upon me, and the things that God had done in me prior to all of these events that I'm going to share with you taking place, it gave me the attitude that though he slay me, yet will I trust him. So that's what I'm going to talk about. If I can get through this video, this will be a little bit longer. I told you my videos will be various lengths. I have some 5-minute ones, some 45-minute ones, and everything in between. But this is the most touching story of my entire life, and it's been hard to try to process the thoughts, to try to even bring back the memories, because it's not something that I would want to relive, although I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for what God did in my life through it all. But it was just difficult. You know, I've cried as I've just thought about it over the last couple of weeks, and I've alluded to some of it in some of my other videos and all that, but today I just thought that I should go ahead and tell the story just to have it on record. It's not even written down anywhere. It's just something that my wife and I lived through, and then some parts of it that I lived through all by myself, you know, because I was thinking about it maybe from a completely different perspective from the get-go than my wife was. So anyway, I guess I should go all the way back to the fact that after I gave everything to God, when I was talking about in like February 2003, shortly after that, or around that time, when I had read the whole Bible cover to cover, my favorite Bible story, for some reason I was just really drawn to the story of Abraham and Isaac. Now it's a wonderful parallel of God and Jesus and the gospel, and there's so much theology in there. There's so many just wonderful takeaways from that story. But the part that applies to this story that I'm going to tell today is simply that Abraham was called by God to take his only son, who he had waited decades and decades and decades and prayed for. In his 90s, he can see he ended up having this son Isaac, and then God tells him when Isaac was a boy to take him up to the top of a mountain and offer him up as a burnt offering. And you can imagine the turmoil that Abraham had to have gone through, you know, to be waiting for this son his whole life. God gives him the son, and then God says, go and give him back. And so there's this journey, this 3-day journey that they're walking to the mount, and Abraham is going to bind his son and put wood on him and stab him and offering up as a burnt offering to the Lord. And that's what Abraham thought anyway. But when he got up there, you know, him and his son had this conversation. Some of the Bible records, and then some you can imagine you know, that it didn't, obviously didn't record. And you can just imagine the heartache between both of them, trying to be obedient to God and walk out this strange command. You know, God doesn't want human sacrifices in that way. And, you know, but Abraham's just being obedient to whatever God is telling him to do. Later on, you find out in the New Testament, it's not written in Genesis 22, but you find out later that Abraham believed that God was able to raise him from the dead. And so that's why, even if God was giving him this strange command, Abraham believed in the great power of God, that God could do that miracle for him. So anyway, he gets up there. He's about to bring the knife down on his son, and the Lord says, stop. Now I know that you fear me. And this ram, there's, you know, sermons called a ram in the bush, and this sacrifice, Abraham still was going to make a sacrifice to God, but it was not his son after all. It was this ram that was caught in the thicket on the other side of the hill. And so Abraham did not have to give up his son, but Abraham loved God so much that he would have given up his only son if that's what he was called to do. So anyway, I loved that story so much. And it just pierced my heart before we even had a child. I just really loved that story, and I would hear it over and over. Then after Jaden was born, I would still hear that story at just weird times. I'd go to work and I'd turn on the radio and I'd hear it. I'd go to a revival conference over here, some guy from South Africa, he's preaching on it. And over I just kept hearing this story of Abraham and Isaac, and it would just bring tears to my eyes all the time. And so anyway, little did I know I was about to live out something similar as this story. So let's change sides a little bit. Like I said, my wife always wanted to have children. I was full of nevers. I never was going to work where I work. I was never going to get married. I was never going to have children. And all these things I said I would never do, I ended up doing. My wife has a way of getting her way. And so anyway, what ended up transpiring was, we ended up getting married. She chased me for a long time, for about 5 years. And when she was finally withdrawing and kind of giving up, and she started dating somebody else a little bit, it just hit me. You're being stupid. This is the best wife, and if you do somehow ever have kids, the best mother that you're ever going to come across. It's like she was kind of made to be a wife and a mother. And so one of the wisest or few wise decisions I made back then, I went ahead and asked her to marry me on Christmas morning. We got married that following August the 19th, and so we're set up with that, but never had any discussion about having kids. And then finally she ends up getting pregnant. I almost die from a heart attack because she's just pregnant. I'm thinking my whole life is about to change, and I'm just trying to adjust to it day after day. And we ended up going for the first ultrasound of the baby, and for some reason it's all taken a really long time, and I'm working nights, I'm working really long shifts, and finally, I hate to do it, but I sat with her as long as I could, and I had to go ahead and go home and go to sleep. Well, I go home, and like right when I pass out, all of a sudden I hear just wailing in the kitchen. Now my wife is not a crier, okay, and I just hear her screaming, crying, and I went out to see what's wrong. I thought she'd been shot or something. I had no idea what it could be, and what it was that she had miscarried the baby. And so after that, that's a whole nother event in itself. You people who have gone through that, you can understand what a tragic circumstance that could be. And I just felt like I owed it to her after that. We're going to have children. We're going to try to have children, and just hope God blesses us in that way. And so funny thing was, we weren't trying. And then we conceived, and then we started trying, and we just could not have a baby. She could not get pregnant for anything. Over a year went by. We had testing done, and all found out she was okay and I was okay, but it just wasn't happening. And throughout this whole time, there's a lot. I'm going to do a marriage video at some time later on, but throughout this whole time, our marriage, the pressure of trying to have a kid, I had started doing some ministry work. I didn't know how to balance that stuff, and there was just a lot of new pressures in our life, and we started fighting. Like I said, at first of our marriage, I didn't really know how to treat a woman. I didn't know what to do in certain circumstances. I would blow up, she would blow up, and it just got to a point to where I remember we passed up one ovulation cycle without even having sex. And finally one night we just got in such a bad argument that I left. I walked out of the house, and I said, God, I was driving on the roads, and I was just crying. I was like, and I've mentioned I cry a lot in several videos. I do. I get touched, I cry, but some of these situations I was just boo-hooing. I was crying. Any man who could go through some things that I've went through and not cry, you're just a different breed. But I've cried to God. I cried in front of people. I'll cry. Okay, anyway, so it doesn't take away from my toughness or my courage or anything like that. But anyway, so I'm driving down the road, and I'm crying, and I'm praying to God, and I'm telling God, I know that I made a vow. I know that I said I would never get divorced no matter what. I was firm on that. But God, I cannot see how this can possibly work out. I just, we're at our wits' end with each other. We have all this stress, and we just don't know how to communicate with each other. But I'm sitting there praying. I'm driving down the road praying, God, if we have to have a miracle to even survive this marriage. Forget about getting pregnant now. We're about to divorce. And right as I'm praying for her, driving down Kings Highway, I'm going to check into a hotel, and she calls me, and tells me I just took a pregnancy test and I'm pregnant. And I'm like, you know, the one time we skip an ovulation cycle, you know, however that happened, I'm thinking it's like kind of a miracle at that time. You know, I mean, I know God's involved in it and everything. He's involved in all this stuff. But I mean, just at the time that I was praying for a miracle to happen, you know, she just happens to get out of an argument and go take a pregnancy test and find out that she's pregnant. So I go home and we're rejoicing about that. And